right, fourth grade, welcome back. We are going to be reading Chapter 7 of Bridge to Terabithia. So, before we get started, I want you to take out your envelope, your character reference sheet, a pen or a pencil so that you can take notes about the characters, and the vocabulary words that we included in week 5's packet. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and pull those words up on the computer so that we can go over them before we get started on Chapter 7. So it starts with, it's the page that has vigorously and stricken at the top. In the Chapter 5 video, we learned vigorously, stricken, speculation, and humbly. And you can go ahead with your pencil or your pen, write 5 and 6 in the bottom corners of these if you would like, so you can keep track of the chapters. Now the next 4 words are going to be Chapter 7 and Chapter 8, and you can also write on those if you would like to, because these are your vocabulary cards. And you will be able to use those vocabulary cards next week when we have a vocabulary assessment for Chapters 1 through 8. So you'll be able to use your vocabulary cards for that. But let's go ahead and get started with the 4 words for Chapter 7 and Chapter 8. The first word is reluctant. Reluctant means that it is someone who's unwilling or uneager. And remember from our prefix and suffix lessons previously in the year that un means not. So they're not willing or not eager to do something. The next word is nuisance. And nuisance means annoyance or inconvenience. So something that's an annoyance, kind of like when the internet goes out, it's an annoyance. It is also a nuisance. That is a synonym. Those 2 words are synonyms, nuisance and annoyance. They mean the same thing. The next word is dumbfounded. And when someone is dumbfounded about something, that means that they're just astonished about something. And then the last word, the 4th word for Chapter 7 and Chapter 8 is spectacle. And spectacle is an exhibition or show. So think about if you have seen anything on TV that's like a concert, how they have the big fireworks and the laser light shows, and they go all out and they like have balloons exploding with confetti in the air, all that craziness. That's a spectacle. So those are our 4 words for Chapter 7 and Chapter 8. Now, Chapter 7 is about 15 pages. So we are going to go ahead and break that up into 2 separate videos. So I'm going to start reading Chapter 7, and I'm going to only read about half of the chapter. And then I'm going to do another video that'll be part 2, that'll be the last half of the chapter. Just because it's so long, we want to break it up into 2 separate days for you on your pacing chart. So let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 7, The Golden Room. Mr. Burke had begun to repair the old Perkins place. After Christmas, Mrs. Burke was right in the middle of writing a book, so she wasn't available to help, which left Leslie the jobs of hunting and fetching. For all his smartness with politics and music, Mr. Burke was inclined to be absent-minded. And if we look, because we're on the Epic app, we can click absent-minded, and it tells you that it's someone who is lost in thought and unaware of their surroundings or actions. So they're just not in the moment all the time. Continuing on after absent-minded, he would put down the hammer to pick up the how-to book and then lose the hammer between there and the projects he was working on. Leslie was good at finding things for him, and he liked her company as well. When she came home from school and on the weekends, he wanted her around. Leslie explained all this to Jess. So what Jess is seeing right now is a completely different relationship than what he has experienced with his own father. Leslie and her father have a different experience than what he has with his father. and he's not quite sure what to do about that right now. Continuing on. Jess tried going to Terabithia alone, but it was no good. It needed Leslie to make the magic. He was afraid he would destroy everything by trying to force the magic on his own, when it was plain that the magic was reluctant to come for him. If we went home, either his mother was after him to do some chores, or Maybelle wanted him to play Barbie. Lord, he wished a million times he'd never helped buy that stupid doll. He'd no more than lie down on the floor to paint that Maybelle would be after him to put an arm back on or snap up a dress. Joyce Ann was worse. She got a devilish delight out of sitting smack down on his rump when he was stretched out working. If he yelled at her to get the heck off him, she'd stick her index finger in the corner of her mouth and holler, which would, of course, crank up his mother. Jessie Oliver, you leave that baby alone. What you mean lying there in the middle of the floor doing nothing anyway? Didn't I tell you I couldn't cook supper before you chopped wood for the stove? Sometimes he would sneak down to the old Perkins place and find Prince Tyrion crying on the porch where Mr. Burke had exiled him. And if we don't know the word exiled, we can click on it. And exiled means forced to leave one's own country or home. So when he exiled him to the porch, that means that he wouldn't let him in the house. You couldn't blame the man. No one could get anything done with that animal grabbing his hand or jumping up to lick his face. He'd take PT for a romp in the Burke's upper field. If it was a mild day, Miss Bessie would be mooing nervously from across the fence. She couldn't seem to get used to the yipping and snapping. Or maybe it was the time of year, the last drudges of winter spoiling the taste of everything. Nobody, human or animal, seemed happy, except Leslie. She was crazy about fixing up that old broken down old wreck of a house. She loved being needed by her father. Half the time they were supposed to be working, they were just yakking away. And yakking is kind of a slang word for talk. She was learning, she related glowingly at recess, to understand her father. It had never occurred to Jess that parents were meant to be understood, any more than the safe at the Millsburg First National was sitting around begging him to crack it. Parents were what they were. It wasn't up to you to try and puzzle them out. There was something weird about a grown man wanting to be friends with his own child. He ought to have friends his own age and let her have hers. Sounds a little bit like Jess is jealous of the relationship between Leslie and her father. And that's probably because he doesn't understand it, because he doesn't have the same relationship with his father. Continuing on. Jess's feelings about Leslie's father poked up like a canker sore. You keep biting it and it gets bigger and worse instead of better. You spend a lot of time trying to keep your teeth away from it. Then, sure as Christmas, you forgot the silly thing and chomp right down on it. Lord, that man got in his way. It even poisoned what time he did have with Leslie. She'd be sitting there bubbling away at recess, and it would be almost like old times. Then, without warning, she'd say, Bill thinks so-and-so. Chomp. Right down on the old sore. Finally, she noticed. It took her until February, and for a girl as smart as Leslie, that was a long, long time. Why don't you like Bill? Who said I didn't? Jess Aarons, how stupid do you think I am? Pretty stupid, sometimes. But what he actually said was, what makes you think I don't like him? Well, you never come to the house anymore. At first, I thought it was something I'd done. But it's not that. You still talk to me at school. Lots of times I see you in the field playing with PT, but you don't even come near the door. You're always busy. He was uncomfortably aware of how much he sounded like Brenda when he said that. Well, for spaghetti sauce. You could offer to help, you know. It was like all the lights coming back on after an electrical storm. Lord, who was the stupid one? Still, it took him a few days to feel comfortable around Leslie's father. Part of the problem was he didn't know what to call him. Hey, he'd say, and both Leslie and her father would turn around. Mr. Burke. I wish you'd call me Bill, Jess. Yeah, he fumbled around with the name for a couple more days, but it came more easily with practice. It also helped to know some things that Bill, for all his brains and books, didn't know. Jess found he was really useful to him, not a nuisance to be tolerated or set out on the porch like PT. So let's pause for a minute. Jess probably feels very uncomfortable with calling Leslie's father Bill instead of Mr. Burke, because Jess is raised in the South. And in the South, you're taught that all adults are to be addressed properly with their name, as in Mr. or Mrs. or Sir or Ma'am. So to call an adult by their first name was probably a little uncomfortable for him at first, which is why he fumbled around using that name for a few days before he really got used to doing it. But I do find it interesting that Leslie's father is trying to make him feel more comfortable around him by giving him a more relaxed environment. He's treating him more like a friend. So let's continue on with "You're amazing." "You're amazing," Bill would say. "Where did you learn that, Jess?" Jess never quite knew how he knew things, so he'd shrug and let Bill and Leslie praise him to each other, though the work itself was praise enough. First, they ripped out the boards that covered the ancient fireplace, coming up upon the rusty bricks like prospectors upon the mother lode. Next, they got the old wallpaper off the living room wall, all 5 garish layers of it. Sometimes, as they lovingly patched and painted, they listened to Bill's records or sang. Leslie and Jess teaching Bill some of Miss Edmonds' songs, and Bill teaching them some he knew. At other times, they would talk. Jess listened wonderingly as Bill explained things that were going on in the world. If Mama could hear him, she'd swear he was another Walter Cronkite instead of some hippie. All the Burkes were smart. Not smart maybe about fixing things or growing things, but smart in a way Jess had never known real people to be. Like one day while they were working, Judy came down and read out loud to them, mostly poetry, and some of it in Italian, which, of course, Jess couldn't understand. But he buried his head in the rich sound of the words and let himself be wrapped warmly around in the feel of the Burke's brilliance. They painted the living room gold. Leslie and Jess had wanted blue, but Bill held out for gold, which turned out to be so beautiful that they were glad they had given in. The sun would slant in from the west in the late afternoon until the room was brimful of light. Finally, Bill rented a sander from Millsburg Plaza, and they took off the black floor paint down to the wide oak boards and refinished them. "No rugs," Bill said. "No," agreed Judy. It would be like putting a veil on the Mona Lisa." When Bill and the children had finished razor blading the last bits of paint off the windows and washed the panes, they called Judy down from her upstairs study to come and see. The 4 of them sat down on the floor and gazed around. It was gorgeous. Leslie gave a deep, satisfied sigh. "I love this room," she said. "Don't you feel the golden enchantment of it? It is worthy to be," Jess looked up in sudden alarm, "in a palace." Relief. In such a mood, a person might even let a sworn secret slip. But she hadn't. not even to Bill and Judy. And he knew how she felt about her parents. She must have seen his anxiety because she winked at him across Bill and Judy, just as he sometimes winked at Maybelle over Joyce Ann's head. Terabithia was still just for the two of them. The next afternoon, they called PT and headed for Terabithia. It had been more than a month since they had been there together, and as they neared the creek bed, they slowed down. Jess wasn't sure he still remembered how to be a king. We've been away for many years, Leslie was whispering. How do you suppose the kingdom has fared in our absence? Where have we been? Conquering the hostile savages on our northern borders, she answered. But the lines of communication have been broken, and thus we do not have tidings of our beloved homeland for many a full moon. How was that for regular queen talk? Jess wished he could match it. You think anything bad has happened? So we're going to go ahead and we're going to pause there with our video, and we'll read the rest of chapter 7 in part 2. So I look forward to seeing you guys for part 2. Okay, have a great day.